The text message came at 2:47 a.m. Isabel stared at her phone, the blue glow illuminating her exhausted face in the darkness of her penthouse bedroom. She had been lying awake for hours, the familiar weight of insomnia pressing down on her chest like a physical force. The message was from an unknown number, but the words made her blood run cold. "Your father is dead. He had a heart attack an hour ago. I thought you should know. Margaret." Margaret. Her stepmother. The woman who had made Isabel's teenage years a living hell, who had systematically erased every trace of Isabel's mother from their home, who had whispered poison into her father's ear until he had looked at his only daughter like she was a stranger. Isabel hadn't spoken to her father in 7 years. Not since she had walked out of that cold, sterile mansion on her 25th birthday, vowing never to return. He had chosen Margaret over her, chosen the woman who had given him a son over the daughter who had worshipped him. He had chosen tradition over love, appearance over truth. And now he was dead. She should have felt something. Grief, maybe. Regret. Even anger would have been preferable to the hollow numbness that settled over her like a shroud. But there was nothing. Just the same emptiness that had been her constant companion for as long as she could remember. She set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing through the logistics. The funeral would be in 3 days. She would have to attend, not for her father's sake, but for the sake of appearances. The Whitmore name carried weight in the business world, and the scandal of the CEO's daughter absent from her own father's funeral would be devastating. Isabel had spent 15 years building Whitmore Industries from a struggling textile company into a global fashion empire. She wasn't about to let a personal grievance destroy everything she had worked for. But the thought of returning to that house, of seeing Margaret's smug face and her half-brother Julian's indifferent eyes, made her stomach churn. She reached for her phone again and sent a quick message to her assistant. "Cancel all meetings for the next week. I need to go to London for a family matter." The reply came almost instantly. "Of course, Ms. Whitmore. Is everything all right?" She didn't bother responding. She didn't have the energy for pleasantries, and she certainly didn't have the capacity for emotional honesty. The funeral was held on a gray, drizzly Tuesday morning. The kind of day that seemed designed to match the mood of the occasion. Isabel stood at the back of the church, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, her face a mask of composed neutrality. She watched the procession of mourners file past her father's casket, offering condolences to Margaret and Julian, who sat in the front pew like grieving royalty. She didn't approach them. She didn't speak to anyone. She stayed in the shadows, a silent observer of a life she had been excluded from. And then she saw him. He was standing near the back of the church, a young boy clinging to his hand. The boy couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with messy dark hair and eyes that were far too old for his small face. The man holding his hand was tall and broad-shouldered, with a kind, weathered face and a quiet dignity that seemed out of place among the polished, wealthy mourners. His suit was clearly off the rack, slightly too big in the shoulders, and his shoes were scuffed at the toes. He looked like he had wandered into the wrong room by accident. But there was something about the way he held himself, the way he looked at the boy with such fierce protectiveness, that made Isabel's breath catch in her throat. She watched as he approached the casket, his hand still firmly gripping the boy's. He bowed his head for a moment, his lips moving in what looked like a silent prayer. Then he turned and started walking toward the exit. But the boy stopped. He had spotted something on the floor near Isabel's feet. A small toy car, probably dropped by one of the other children in attendance. He let go of his father's hand and darted forward, his small fingers reaching for the toy. And then he stumbled. Isabel moved before she could think, her arms reaching out to catch the boy before he could hit the marble floor. She scooped him up, her expensive heels wobbling slightly on the polished surface. The boy looked up at her, his wide, brown eyes full of surprise and something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice softer than she had intended. The boy nodded, his lower lip trembling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to fall." "Don't apologize," Isabel said, setting him gently back on his feet. "Accidents happen. Are you hurt?" He shook his head, and then his father was there, kneeling beside him, his hands running over the boy's arms and legs as if checking for injuries. "Rowan, what happened? Are you okay? Did you fall?" The man's voice was panicked, his face pale with worry. "I'm fine, Daddy," the boy said, his voice small. "The lady caught me." The man looked up, and for the first time, Isabel met his eyes fully. They were hazel, the kind of warm, golden brown that seemed to hold a lifetime of stories. They were also filled with exhaustion, pain, and a bone-deep weariness that she recognized all too well. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done if he had been hurt. He's all I have." Isabel nodded, not trusting herself to speak. There was something about this man that made her feel strangely vulnerable, as if he could see through the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself. "I'm Nathaniel," he said, extending his hand. "Nathaniel Hartley. And this is my son, Rowan." "Isabel Whitmore," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was warm and firm, and she felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her at the contact. Nathaniel's eyes widened. "Whitmore? As in Whitmore Industries?" He looked down at his son, then back at her. "Your father." "Was the man in the casket?" "Yes," she said flatly. "I'm his daughter." She expected pity. She expected the usual awkward condolences, the murmured sympathy. Instead, Nathaniel just nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to lose a parent. It's hard, no matter what kind of relationship you had." Isabel felt her carefully constructed mask crack, just slightly. "How would you know what kind of relationship we had?" "Because I saw you standing at the back," he said, his voice gentle. "I saw you watching the mourners but not joining them. I saw the way you looked at the casket, like you were looking at a stranger, not a father. I know that look. I wore it at my own mother's funeral." Isabel's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," she said automatically. "I didn't mean to." "You don't have to apologize," he said, cutting her off with a small, sad smile. "We all have our own ways of grieving. Or not grieving, as the case may be." Before she could respond, a woman in a black dress approached them, her face pinched with disapproval. "Mr. Hartley," she said, her voice clipped. "The trustees are ready to speak with you. They're waiting in the vestry." Nathaniel's expression shifted, the kindness replaced by something harder, more guarded. "Tell them I'll be there in a moment." "Now, Mr. Hartley," the woman insisted. "They've been waiting quite long enough." "I said," Nathaniel repeated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "I'll be there in a moment." The woman's eyes widened, and she scurried away without another word. Isabel watched the exchange with interest. "Trustees?" she asked. "What's that about?" Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "It's a long story," he said. "The short version is that my mother-in-law's estate left a trust for Rowan, and the trustees are trying to block me from accessing it. They don't think I'm a suitable guardian." He let out a bitter laugh. "They think I'm going to squander it on booze and gambling. They don't know that I haven't had a drink in 3 years, and the only thing I gamble on is whether Rowan will finish his vegetables at dinner." Isabel felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised her. "That's ridiculous. You clearly love your son. Any fool can see that." Nathaniel looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. "You think so?" "I know so," she said firmly. "I've spent 15 years dealing with fools. I know one when I see one. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Thank you," he said. "That means more than you know." Rowan tugged on his father's hand, yawning widely. "Daddy, I'm tired. Can we go home now?" "Just a little longer, buddy," Nathaniel said, his voice softening. "I need to talk to some people first, and then we can go." "Okay?" Rowan nodded sleepily, leaning against his father's leg. Isabel watched the small interaction, and something in her chest tightened painfully. She had never wanted children. She had never even allowed herself to imagine a family, a husband, a home filled with laughter and warmth. Those things were for other people, people who hadn't been raised by a cold, absent father and a stepmother who had made it her life's mission to destroy her. But watching Nathaniel with his son, she felt a pang of longing so intense it almost brought her to her knees. "Can I help?" The words were out before she could stop them. "I know I'm a stranger, but I have lawyers. Good ones. If the trustees are being difficult, I could make some calls." Nathaniel stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and wariness. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "I know," Isabel said, her voice steady. "But I believe in helping people who deserve it. And I believe in you." It was a gamble, a wild, impulsive thing to say to a man she had met less than an hour ago. But something in his eyes made her want to fight for him, to protect him and his son from the cold, uncaring world that had already taken so much from them. Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, his hazel eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'll take your help. But only if you let me buy you dinner first. As a thank you." Isabel blinked, taken aback. I don't really have time for dinner. I'm flying back to New York tomorrow morning. I have a company to run." "Then let me buy you a coffee," he said, a hint of stubbornness creeping into his voice. "A coffee and a pastry. Maybe a scone. The place down the street makes the best scones in London, and I know how much you Americans love your baked goods." Against her will, Isabel felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward. "And if I don't like scones?" "Then you clearly have no taste," he said, grinning now. "And I'll have to teach you what real food tastes like." She should have said no. She should have walked away, gone back to her hotel, and forgotten all about the handsome, exhausted single father and his sad-eyed little boy. But something in her heart, something she had thought long dead, whispered a different message. "Say yes. Say yes." "Fine," she heard herself say. "One coffee. But I'm paying." Nathaniel's grin widened. "Not a chance," he said. "I can't have my new lawyer thinking I'm a mooch." And just like that, the fragile thread of connection between them was woven a little tighter. The coffee shop was exactly as Nathaniel had promised, a small, charming hole in the wall tucked away on a quiet side street. The smell of fresh pastries and roasted coffee beans enveloped them as they walked in, and Rowan immediately perked up, his eyes going wide at the display case filled with colorful cakes and cookies. "Daddy, can I have a chocolate croissant?" he asked, pressing his nose against the glass. "We'll see," Nathaniel said, ruffling his hair. "First, let's find a seat." They settled into a cozy booth near the back, Rowan immediately pulling out a small sketchbook and a battered box of crayons. Nathaniel ordered a pot of tea and 2 scones, one for himself and one for Isabel, who reluctantly admitted that they did, in fact, smell delicious. "So," Nathaniel said, once they were settled, "tell me about yourself. Why is a powerful CEO like you going around rescuing strangers in churches?" Isabel laughed, surprised by the sound. "I don't normally make a habit of it," she admitted. "But there was something about you. I couldn't just walk away." Nathaniel's eyes softened. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I felt it too. From the moment I saw you, I felt like I'd known you for years. Isabel's heart fluttered in her chest. That's a strange thing to say to a complete stranger. Is it? Nathaniel shrugged, a self-deprecating smile on his lips. I've never been very good at pretending. When I feel something, I say it. It's gotten me into trouble more times than I can count, but at least I never have to wonder what I should have said. Is that so? Isabel asked, a teasing edge creeping into her voice. So if you felt like kissing me, you'd just do it? Nathaniel's eyes widened, and a faint flush crept up his neck. That's... He cleared his throat. Yes. I mean, no. I mean... He ran a hand through his hair, flustered. You're very direct, aren't you? I'm a CEO, Isabel said, grinning. It comes with the territory. Nathaniel laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I like you, he said simply. I like you a lot. They talked for hours, long after Rowan had fallen asleep on the booth seat, his crayons scattered across the table. Nathaniel told her about his wife, Amelia, who had died of cancer 3 years ago. He told her about the grief that had nearly destroyed him, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if he would ever feel anything but pain again. He told her about Rowan, how the little boy had been his lifeline, his reason to keep going. And Isabel told him about her own life. About her mother, who had died when she was 12. About her father, who had remarried within a year, who had let Margaret erase every trace of her mother from their home. About Julian, her half-brother, who had been the golden child, the son who could do no wrong while Isabel was relegated to the shadows. I left when I was 25, she said, her voice hollow. I walked out with nothing but a suitcase and a small inheritance from my mother. I built Whitmore Industries from the ground up, brick by brick. And I swore I would never need anyone again. I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me. Nathaniel reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm, calloused, and impossibly steady. That must have been so lonely, he said softly. To build an empire all by yourself, with no one to share it with. Isabel felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. It wasn't that bad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I got used to it. You shouldn't have to get used to loneliness, Nathaniel said. No one should. The next thing she knew, she was crying. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She hadn't cried in years. She had trained herself to be cold, unfeeling, untouchable. But with Nathaniel, all of her carefully constructed defenses crumbled. He didn't say anything. He just held her hand and let her cry, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on her skin. When the tears finally stopped, Isabel pulled away, embarrassed. I'm sorry, she said. I don't know what came over me. Don't apologize, Nathaniel said gently. You needed that. You've been holding on to all of that pain for years, and it's not good for you. You need to let it out. Isabel sniffled, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. I don't even know why I'm telling you all of this. We just met a few hours ago. Maybe that's why, Nathaniel said. Sometimes it's easier to open up to a stranger. There's no history, no expectations. You can just be yourself. Isabel looked at him, really looked at him. He was so kind, so gentle, so patient. He had been through so much pain, and yet he was still whole. Still capable of love, of trust, of hope. You're a remarkable man, Nathaniel Hartley, she said softly. He smiled. So are you, Isabel Whitmore. So are you. The next morning, Isabel flew back to New York. The flight was smooth, the weather clear, but her mind was a chaos of conflicting emotions. She couldn't stop thinking about Nathaniel. About the way he had looked at her, the way he had held her hand, the way he had made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. She told herself it was nothing. A passing fancy, a moment of weakness. She would go back to her life, back to her work, and she would forget all about the kind-eyed single father and his precious little boy. But she couldn't. Days turned into weeks, and still Nathaniel was all she could think about. She found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping for a message from him. She found herself replaying their conversation in her head, imagining what he was doing, whether he was thinking about her too. She was going crazy. She, Isabel Whitmore, the ice queen of Wall Street, was pining after a man she had known for less than 24 hours. It was ridiculous. It was pathetic. It was completely, utterly impossible. But she couldn't stop. 3 weeks later, she got the call. It was Nathaniel. His voice was strained, panicked. "Isabel? I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. The trustees, they're trying to take Rowan away from me. They're saying I'm an unfit parent, that I can't provide for him. They've already filed a petition with the court. The hearing is in 2 weeks." Isabel's heart dropped. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice cool and steady. "I need to know exactly what they're accusing you of." Nathaniel explained. The trustees claimed that Nathaniel was unstable, that he had a history of substance abuse, a single DUI from before Rowan was born, which had been dismissed. That he didn't have a stable income, he worked as a freelance carpenter, which the trustees deemed unsuitable for a child of Rowan's inheritance. They painted him as a lazy, irresponsible moocher who was only interested in the money. Isabel listened, her blood boiling. She had faced scumbags like this before. People who used their power to manipulate, to control, to destroy. People who had no regard for the well-being of others. "Don't worry," she said, her voice sharp. "I have the best lawyers in the city. We'll fight this. We'll win." And they did. Isabel threw the full weight of her resources behind Nathaniel's case. She hired the best family law attorney in London, a fierce woman named Clara Hastings who had never lost a custody battle. She provided character witnesses, financial documents, and a glowing report from the social workers who had visited Nathaniel's home. She even arranged for a child psychologist to assess Rowan and testify to the boy's bond with his father. The hearing was intense, the courtroom filled with tension. The trustees' lawyers tried to paint Nathaniel as a deadbeat, a failure, a man who didn't deserve his son. But Clara Hastings was relentless, dismantling their arguments one by one. And then it was Isabel's turn to speak. She stood at the witness stand, her voice clear and steady. "I've known Nathaniel Hartley for only a short time," she said. "But in that time, I've seen a man who loves his son more than anything in the world. A man who has sacrificed everything for that boy. Who has worked 2 jobs, gone without sleep, given up every pleasure and comfort to provide a good life for Rowan. The trustees see a man who doesn't fit their idea of a suitable guardian. But I see a father. A real father. And I will do everything in my power to make sure that father and son are never separated." The courtroom was silent. When the judge finally delivered her verdict, it was in favor of Nathaniel. "Mr. Hartley," the judge said, "I've seen many cases like this before. Wealthy relatives using their power to control a child's life. But I've also seen love, real love, and it's far rarer than money. You clearly love your son, and he clearly loves you. I see no reason to separate you. The trust will be placed under your control, with the provision that a portion of the funds be set aside for Rowan's education and future needs." Nathaniel burst into tears. He hugged Rowan so tightly the little boy squirmed. And then he turned to Isabel, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," Isabel said. "Just promise me you'll take care of yourself. And Rowan. That's all I want." Later that night, they sat in Nathaniel's small, cluttered living room, sipping tea and watching Rowan sleep on the couch. The little boy was exhausted from the events of the day, his small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. "I can't believe you did all of this for us," Nathaniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't even know us." "I know you," Isabel said softly. "That's enough." Nathaniel set down his tea and turned to face her. "Isabel," he said, his voice serious. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I'm in love with you," he said. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks. But I've never felt this way about anyone. Not even Amelia. You've changed everything for me. You've made me believe that there's hope, that there's happiness, that there's a future worth fighting for." Isabel's heart hammered in her chest. "Nathaniel. I know you're busy," he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I know you have a whole life in New York. A company to run, a city to conquer. I know I'm just a carpenter, a nobody from London. But I don't care. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is you. And Rowan. And the possibility of a life together. A real life, filled with love and laughter and all the things that matter." Isabel was speechless. She had spent her entire life building walls, protecting herself from the possibility of love. But with Nathaniel, it was different. He had broken through her defenses effortlessly, not with force, but with kindness. With patience. With love. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you since the moment I saw you in that church." Nathaniel's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," she said, a smile spreading across her face. "I just didn't know how to say it. I've never said it to anyone before. I've never let anyone in." Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I'll wait for you," he murmured against her hair. "I'll wait as long as it takes. And if you need to go back to New York, I'll wait for you there. I'll wait for you anywhere. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll come back to me. To us. Promise me you'll never let the distance or the work or the fear keep us apart." Isabel pulled back, looking him in the eyes. "I promise," she said. "I'll wait for you, Nathaniel. I'll wait as long as it takes. And when the time is right, we'll be together. No matter what." The next few months were a whirlwind. Isabel flew back and forth between London and New York, trying to balance the demands of her company with her growing feelings for Nathaniel. It was exhausting, chaotic, and utterly wonderful. Rowan adored her. He followed her around like a shadow, showing her his drawings, telling her about his favorite toys, asking her endless questions about New York and the skyscrapers and the yellow taxis. He called her Aunt Izzy, and the name made her heart swell. And Nathaniel. Nathaniel was everything. He was her anchor, her safe harbor, the one person who made her feel like she was enough. He never asked for more than she could give. He never pressured her or made demands. He just loved her, quietly and steadily, and that was more than she had ever dreamed possible. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a cold December night, and Isabel was in London for the holidays. She had flown in on Christmas Eve, determined to spend the holiday with Nathaniel and Rowan. They had decorated a small tree in Nathaniel's living room, baking cookies and singing carols and laughing until their sides ached. After Rowan had gone to bed, Nathaniel pulled Isabel aside. His face was serious, his eyes filled with nervous anticipation. "Izzy," he said, taking her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other for very long. And I know you have a whole life in New York. But I can't imagine my life without you. I've been thinking about this for months, and I can't wait any longer." He dropped to one knee, and Isabel's breath caught in her throat. "Isabel Whitmore," he said, his voice trembling. You came into my life when I least expected it. You saved me, saved my son, saved our family. You are the most incredible woman I have ever met. And I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me? He pulled out a small ring box and opened it, revealing a simple platinum band with a single, flawless diamond. It was modest, elegant, and absolutely perfect. Tears streamed down Isabel's face. She couldn't speak. All she could do was nod, her hands shaking as Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, she finally managed to whisper. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Nathaniel stood up and swept her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally pulled apart, Rowan was standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. Daddy? What's happening? Nathaniel laughed, scooping up his son and holding him close. Aunt Izzy is going to be your new mommy, he said. If that's okay with you. Rowan's eyes widened. Really? He asked, looking at Isabel. You're going to be my mommy? Isabel knelt down to his level, her eyes filling with tears again. If you want me to be, sweetheart. I would love to be your mommy. Rowan threw his arms around her neck, hugging her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you, Aunt Izzy, he whispered. I love you so much. I love you too, Rowan, she whispered back. More than you'll ever know. The wedding was small, intimate, and perfect. A simple ceremony at the church where they had first met, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Nathaniel's mother was there, her face glowing with pride. Isabel's assistant made the trip from New York, armed with a bouquet of white roses. Even Rowan played his part, walking Isabel down the aisle in his tiny tuxedo, his small face serious and determined. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, a little voice from the front row shouted, I want cake. And everyone burst into laughter. Nathaniel and Isabel exchanged vows, their voices steady and full of love. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, they kissed to the sound of applause and cheers. As they walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, Isabel felt a wave of joy so powerful it nearly knocked her off her feet. She was finally, truly, completely happy. She had everything she had ever wanted, a man who loved her, a child who adored her, a family that was hers. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would spend the rest of her life cherishing them. 1 year later, Isabel sat in the living room of their new house, a warm, welcoming home filled with the sound of laughter and the smell of freshly baked cookies. Rowan was at school, and Nathaniel was in the kitchen, attempting to make dinner and failing spectacularly. Isabel smiled, watching him through the doorway. He was covered in flour, his hair sticking up in all directions, and he was muttering something about needing a miracle. Need help? She called out. No, he said, his voice muffled. I've got this. I'm a master chef. You can't even boil water without burning it, she teased. That's a lie, he said, emerging from the kitchen, a smudge of flour on his nose. I can absolutely boil water. I just choose not to. Isabel laughed, pulling him into a kiss. I love you, she said. Even if you are a disaster in the kitchen. I love you too, he murmured against her lips. More than anything. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth and chaos of her new life, Isabel Whitmore knew she had finally found her happily ever after. Not in the boardroom, not in the penthouse, but in the arms of a man who loved her and a child who called her mommy. She was home.